Okay, everyone, several new filings in Don Lemon's criminal case. Now, this week, an organization called the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, along with 45 news organizations, including the New York Times and the Washington Post, were granted permission by the court to file an amicus brief. As amicus, they're considered friends of the court. They're not parties to the proceeding all of a sudden. They don't get to participate as a defendant. They just want to file a brief urging the court to dismiss the cases against Don Lemon and Georgia Ford in accordance with the motions to dismiss that they filed last week. So we'll go through the Reporters Committee brief, and I'll just mention, as aggravating as we might find the brief, what effect might it have on the judge? We'll look at the filing from the Reporters Committee in a bit. Also, the fallout this week from the excessive filings last week by journalist co-defendant Georgia Ford. Now, she filed well over 1,000 pages last week, and both the government and the court were forced to let her know why it was inappropriate. So, this is what happened this week. Now, here's the amicus brief from the Reporters Committee and news outlets such as the Washington Post and New York Times. Now, in my view, the brief is perfunctory, okay? It's not a dazzling display of legal astuteness as we've seen repeatedly in this case from the DOJ's Civil Rights Division, which is an indicator of where the merits are in this case. Now, let's go to the brief, and I quote, "Nothing in past prosecutorial misadventures captures the extreme government overcharging in this case. For the first time, the Justice Department has deployed two highly potent civil rights statutes against journalists who, based on documentary footage, followed a protest into a church and covered the interactions between the parishioners and the protesters by filming and questioning the people present on the scene." Unquote. Talk about gaslighting. The Reporters Committee seems unaware that we've all watched the videos. Don Lemon and the rest of the journalist-defendants weren't just documenting a protest. They were live streaming an anti-government onslaught against the field director for ICE, who's one of the pastors at the church. And it was an onslaught against his parishioners, calculated to damage the pastor's standing and to remove him, as evidenced by the continued gauntlet outside the church on Sundays. Now, that was going on as recently as last month. The purpose of the church invasion in January with Don Lemon was to intimidate the congregants so that they would avoid going to church and avoid associating with the pastor. Now, we can plainly see that in the videos, and we hear it in Don Lemon's commentary. When he tried talking down to the pastor, for instance, "Do you understand why this is happening?" And when a child is crying as he leaves the church, Don Lemon says, "He's traumatized, but trauma is the point of all this," admitting that they intended to cause trauma. Now, the Reporters Committee brief doesn't mention that type of evidence. It doesn't talk about any evidence at all in the case, just mischaracterizes what the journalist-defendants were doing at the church. And adding insult to injury, the Reporters Committee brief discusses the specific intent requirement of the FACE Act and KKK Act. They say that specific intent to violate a protected right cannot be shown by journalists merely standing next to people who had specific intent to deprive rights. But let's be real, they weren't just standing next to the activist-defendants. Children at the church thought their parents were going to die. A churchgoer said it seemed to be the prelude to a mass shooting. Now, under the FACE Act and KKK Act, defendants must have a specific intent to deprive another of a protected right, which was on full display in the videos that the defendants themselves live-streamed. Who live-streamed? The journalist-defendants and the activist-defendants as well. Nakima Levy Armstrong and William Kelly, aka Doe Oak Farmer. So, does it make sense to draw a dividing line among the defendants in the case? The judge already discussed the fact that dividing up the defendants isn't supported by the evidence. Now, that was when he denied Lemon's request for a separate pretrial schedule for the journalist-defendants apart from the activist-defendants. Now, then the Reporters Committee brief goes on to talk about George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, which isn't legal briefing, okay? It's journalism. Now, my observation about the Reporters Committee brief overall is it's nonspecific, vague, avoids talking about the facts and evidence in the case, ignores the fact that we've watched the videos that were live streamed from the church by journalist-defendants and activist-defendants alike. For the Reporters Committee to try to deny what we watched and heard on those videos is an insult to our intelligence. Now, to conclude, the government moved to strike the motions to dismiss filed last week by co-defendant Georgia Ford because they're approximately 80 pages and 22,000 words. Now, I counted more than 80 pages, but maybe they've equalized it for font and type size. Now, regardless, the government requested that the motions to dismiss be stricken and that Georgia Ford be required to refile with a reasonable number of pages. Now, the court denied the motion to strike because there was no order already limiting the number of pages, but the judge said that the government's concern is well taken. Going forward, the parties will have to stay within the page limits set for civil motions practice in the district's local rules. And as a matter of fact, we usually don't see criminal cases with this number of filings. It's unusual. The government mentions that Georgia Ford's motions to dismiss contain factual assertions not related to the charged conduct. For instance, she says ICE agents trapped a family inside a vehicle as it filled with chemical gases. I mean, it's not legal argument. And with that, she sidesteps her own conduct at City's church. And the case is about her misconduct and the rest of the co-defendants. It's not as if her family was trapped in a car as it filled with chemical gases, allegedly. That's not why Georgia Ford and Don Lemon were indicted. Not surprised that the government was put off by it. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and don't forget to subscribe.